my surgery, my daughter-in-law handed me a stack of papers. "Sign these," she said. "We need this for our vacation." I smiled gently. I'd already taken care of everything. By Monday, she'd find out the truth. She'd have nowhere left to go. I'm glad you're here. Follow my story until the end, and tell me in the comments what city you're watching from. I'd love to see how far this story reaches. The hospital room was too bright, too clean. The air smelled of antiseptic. I was still groggy from the anesthesia, trying to adjust myself on the stiff white pillows. 3 days after open-heart surgery, even the smallest movement sent waves of dull pain across my chest. "Mom, you have a visitor," the nurse said cheerfully, stepping aside to reveal Amara. My daughter-in-law stood in the doorway, her perfect nails wrapped around an expensive handbag, and that usual smile sweet but cold. "Velma, sitting up already. You're amazing," she said, her perfume filling the room. I nodded weakly, glancing at the flowers she placed beside me, a cheap hospital gift shop bouquet. "Where's my son?" I asked. "Oh, he's busy at work. You know how it is," she said lightly, settling into the chair. But I knew better. Keith hadn't come once since my surgery. My once devoted son had become just another name in Amara's excuses. "I actually brought something important," she said, pulling an envelope from her purse. "Just a few forms that need your signature. It's nothing major." I looked at the highlighted lines. "What are these exactly?" "Just some banking forms," she replied too quickly. "We're planning a family trip to Hawaii. Since you're still listed on some accounts, the bank needs your signature. It's all routine." My hand trembled slightly, not from weakness but from anger. Did she really think I wouldn't notice? These weren't travel papers. They were property transfers. Power of attorney documents. If I signed them, everything I owned would belong to her and my son. "Hawaii sounds lovely," I said calmly. "When are you leaving?" "Next month," she answered, her eyes fixed on my hand hovering over the pen. "And Keith's fine with all this?" I asked. "Of course," she said, her smile faltering for a split second. "He told me you wouldn't mind." I bet he did. The boy I'd raised alone after his father passed, the one I sacrificed everything for, had allowed this. I sighed softly, then signed every line. My signature wobbled, but I made sure it was clear. With each stroke of the pen, her smile grew wider, brighter, greedier. "Thank you, Velma," she said, gathering the papers quickly. "You have no idea how much this means to us." I smiled faintly, the kind of smile she mistook for defeat. "Get some rest," she said, patting my hand. "I'll tell Keith you're recovering well." When the door closed behind her, I leaned back and exhaled. If only she knew. If only she knew that 3 months earlier I'd moved the house into a trust. If only she knew that the accounts she thought she was taking were already empty and closed. If only she knew that her precious papers would mean absolutely nothing. By Monday, she and Keith would realize they had lost everything they'd tried to steal. The pain in my chest tightened, but this time it wasn't from surgery. It was from betrayal, the kind that cuts deeper than any incision. But I wasn't defeated. Not this time. And soon, Amara would learn what happens when you underestimate a 70-year-old woman who's simply had enough. I closed my eyes, listening to the quiet beeping of the heart monitor. It almost sounded like a countdown to Monday, when everything would finally come crashing down. As sleep crept in, one question haunted me. When did my son change? When did the kind, thoughtful boy I'd raised become someone capable of sending his wife to deceive his own mother while she recovered from heart surgery? Memories drifted in like pages of an old photo album. Keith had been the sweetest child, always running toward me with a handful of dandelions, proud as if he'd discovered treasure. Those tiny yellow flowers meant more to me than any luxury bouquet Amara could ever bring. Robert, my husband, had passed away when Keith was only 8. A sudden heart failure, ironically, the same condition that now kept me in this hospital bed. Life can be cruel that way. After that, it was just the two of us against the world. I worked 2 jobs, receptionist by day, waitress by night, to keep our modest home and food on the table. One evening, when he was 15, Keith found me crying over a pile of unpaid bills. "Mom, you don't have to work this hard," he said softly. "I'll find a part-time job after school." "Absolutely not," I told him firmly. "Your job is to study and make something of yourself. That's what your father would have wanted." And he did. He earned a scholarship, becoming the first in our family to graduate college. I'd saved every spare dollar to buy him a proper suit for his first job interview. When he got the offer from an accounting firm, he hugged me tight and said, "This is just the beginning, Mom. One day I'll take care of you the way you took care of me." For a while, he did. We had Sunday dinners, long phone calls, laughter in the backyard. He helped with small repairs around the house. He was everything a mother could wish for. Then, he met Amara. I'll never forget the first time he brought her home. Her eyes swept across my little living room, pausing at the old furniture, the family photos, the faded curtains. I'd spent the whole day cleaning and cooking Keith's favorite pot roast, hoping she'd feel welcome. "How quaint," she said at last, her tone polite but sharp enough to cut. Keith didn't notice. He was mesmerized by her charm, her confidence, her ambition. Maybe that's what drew him in. After years of watching me struggle, perhaps he saw in her a ticket to a life he thought he deserved. They married quickly, a grand ceremony far beyond my means. Amara's parents paid for most of it, and she never let me forget it. The day was beautiful but empty, filled with unfamiliar faces, expensive food I couldn't even pronounce, and not a trace of warmth. A week before the wedding, Keith had asked quietly, "Mom, could you wear something a little more modern? Amara thinks your dress is a bit old-fashioned." That was the first time I saw it, that flicker of embarrassment. My son was ashamed of me. After the wedding, everything changed. Visits became rare. Calls grew shorter. When they did come, Amara's remarks always carried hidden barbs. "This neighborhood has really gone downhill, hasn't it? Have you ever thought of updating your kitchen? Those cabinets are practically vintage." Keith and I toured a few lovely senior communities. You'd love them. Each word was small, but together they cut deep. Keith never spoke up. In time, he even began to repeat her words, as if my home, the place where I'd raised him, was suddenly beneath him. 3 years into their marriage, they ran into money problems. A big mortgage, expensive cars, endless vacations they couldn't afford. "It's just a short-term loan, Mom," Keith had said when they asked for $30,000. "Money I'd saved for medical emergencies in my old age. We'll pay you back soon, with interest," he promised. They never did. Then came the grandchildren, twin boys, full of life, but rarely allowed to visit. When they did, Amara hovered nearby, her tone sharp and watchful. "Don't touch that, Hunter. We don't know how clean it is," she'd say, loud enough for me to hear from the kitchen. The final shift in Keith came last year. I'd gone outside to water my garden while they were visiting, and through the open window I heard Amara's voice. "How much longer do you think she'll be able to live here alone?" she asked. "I don't know," Keith replied. "Her health isn't great. Maybe another year or 2. He paused. "This house could sell for a good price, even with the old furniture. We could finally move closer to the Mitchells." "Mom would never sell," Amara said. "She's too attached to that place." "She might not have a choice," Amara continued softly. "If her health gets worse, as her only son, you'd have power of attorney. You could make decisions in her best interest." There was silence. A moment where the son I'd raised could have spoken up, could have stopped that conversation cold. But instead he said, "You're right. We should talk to a lawyer about it." That night, after they left, I sat in my quiet living room, surrounded by decades of memories, and cried for the first time since Robert's funeral. The pain of that betrayal ran deeper than anything physical. The next morning, I called my own lawyer. Now, lying in this hospital bed, I watched the sunset pour warm colors across the sterile white walls. I felt something complicated, part sadness, part peace. Monday was coming, and with it, the moment Amara would finally learn what happens when you underestimate an old woman who has already survived worse than heartbreak. I closed my eyes, imagining her face when she realized all her careful planning had been for nothing. It wasn't joy I felt, it was clarity. Sometimes love means protecting yourself from the very people who were supposed to protect you. The doctor discharged me Sunday afternoon, a day earlier than planned. I assured the nurses I could manage on my own. I didn't want Keith or Amara anywhere near me or my house. I couldn't bear to see Amara walking through my home, silently measuring everything like it was already hers. Instead, I called Dorothy, my neighbor for over 30 years, and one of the few people I still trusted completely. "Those ungrateful vultures," Dorothy muttered as she helped me into my recliner. "After everything you've done for that boy." I smiled faintly at her anger. Dorothy had watched it all, the slow transformation of my son over the years, his visits growing shorter and colder. "You sure about tomorrow?" she asked gently, fixing the pillows behind me. "Absolutely," I said. "Amara will find out everything once the bank opens at 9. I want to be sitting right here when the storm hits." Dorothy nodded, her expression soft. "I'll be next door if you need me. Just call." When she left, the house grew quiet again. I sat alone in the fading light, thinking back to the day I first set my plan in motion 6 months earlier, right after I overheard that conversation. They never came by on Wednesdays. Amara's spa day. Perfect. I called a taxi and went straight to Harriet Wilson's law office downtown. Harriet and I had gone to high school together but lost touch after graduation. We'd reconnected at our 45th reunion, and she'd since built a respected law practice helping older clients protect their assets. "Velma," she said warmly when I arrived, leading me inside. "What brings you in today?" I took a deep breath and told her everything: Keith's change, Amara's quiet disdain, the plans I'd overheard. As I spoke, her face shifted from sympathy to calm determination. "I see this more often than you'd believe," she said softly. "Children who think they're entitled to what their parents worked for, often encouraged by someone looking for easy money. But there are ways to protect yourself." For the next 3 hours, Harriet laid out a plan. First, we created an irrevocable trust for my house, transferring the deed so that I remained the lifetime beneficiary. The document included provisions preventing Keith or Amara from contesting it, even after I was gone. Next, we closed all joint accounts ones I'd opened years ago so Keith could help in an emergency, and moved everything to a new bank, in my name only. "What if they try to make me sign something?" I asked. Harriet smiled knowingly. "Let them try. Anything you sign now would be legally meaningless. The trust owns your assets, not you personally. They can't touch it." It was strangely freeing, signing those documents, knowing that for the first time in years, my home and my peace of mind were truly safe. As I gathered my things to leave, Harriet added quietly, "You should prepare for their reaction. They won't take it well." "I know," I said, a calm certainty settling in my chest. "But I've spent my whole life protecting Keith. Now it's time I protect myself. Maybe it's time I protected myself instead." From that day on, I kept up the act. I still hosted Sunday dinners, smiled through Amara's little jabs about my vintage furniture, and pretended not to notice Keith's growing curiosity about my finances. "Have you thought about what you'll do with this big house in the future, Mom?" he'd asked during their last visit before my surgery. "I'm doing just fine here," I'd replied calmly, watching the flicker of disappointment cross his face. "But it must be so much work," Amara chimed in. "Wouldn't it be easier to move somewhere smaller? We could help you look." I'd just smiled and changed the subject, letting them believe I was still naive and trusting. Maybe that's why they saw my surgery as their perfect chance, a moment when I'd be too weak to notice what I was signing. Now, sitting in my living room as the sunset stretched long shadows across the floor, I felt strangely peaceful. Tomorrow would bring chaos, but tonight, I had the quiet satisfaction of knowing I'd already won. My phone rang. Keith's name lit up on the screen. "Mom," he said, sounding almost surprised. "You're home. Why didn't you call us? We could have picked you up." "Dorothy helped me," I said simply. "You should have called," he pressed. "We'd have been happy to drive you." I almost laughed at the performance. "It's fine, Keith. I'm settled in now." "Well," he continued, "Amara and I will stop by tomorrow morning to check on you. She has some paperwork to drop off at the bank anyway." Of course she did. They wouldn't want to miss the show me, frail and slow, proof that I couldn't handle things on my own anymore. "That would be lovely," I lied. "See you tomorrow." As I hung up, a small smile crept across my face. They had no idea what was waiting for them. Amara would march into that bank, confident and certain of her victory, only to discover that there was nothing to transfer, nothing to claim, nothing to take. I brewed a cup of tea and leaned back in my recliner, feeling calm for the first time in years. For once, I wasn't the one being deceived. I was the one holding the cards. The grandfather clock ticked softly in the background, a comforting sound. I looked toward Robert's old photograph on the mantel. "I did it," I whispered. "You were right. I was stronger than I thought. And tomorrow, everyone would see just how right he had been." Monday morning. Golden sunlight spilled across the kitchen counters as I moved carefully, each breath steady and sure. Despite the ache in my chest, I made breakfast, took my medication, and sat in my favorite armchair with the book I'd been meaning to read for months. At exactly 9, a car door slammed outside, right on schedule. The doorbell rang, then the sound of a key turning in the lock. They didn't even wait for me to answer. "Mom?" Keith called out. "Where are you?" "In the living room," I replied, keeping my voice calm. Keith appeared first, looking crisp in his business suit. Amara followed, dressed like she was heading to a magazine cover shoot instead of visiting family. "How are you feeling?" Keith asked, leaning down to kiss my cheek. The gesture felt hollow. "As well as can be expected," I said smoothly. "You really should have called us," Amara said, setting her designer purse on the coffee table. "Keith was worried when he found out you'd been discharged early." "I'm sure he was," I said evenly. "Dorothy was happy to help." Keith cleared his throat and glanced at his watch. "Listen, Mom, Amara just needs to stop by the bank to file those papers you signed. I'll stay here and help you out." How thoughtful. He'd distract me while she delivered the final blow. "That's fine," I said. "Amara, there's fresh coffee in the kitchen if you'd like some before you go." Her smile tightened. "Actually, I should head out before it gets busy. I won't be long." She gave Keith a meaningful look before strutting toward the door. The click of her heels faded and the house fell silent. "Can I get you anything, Mom?" Keith asked awkwardly. "Tea? More pillows?" "I'm fine, Keith," I said softly, studying his face. The face of the boy who once picked dandelions for me and swore he'd take care of me someday. "Why don't you sit?" I said. "We haven't talked in a long time." He sank onto the edge of the sofa, stiff and uncertain. "The doctor said your surgery went well," he offered. "No complications?" "None," I said. "I should make a full recovery." "That's great news," he replied, forcing a smile that didn't reach his eyes. "We were worried." "Were you?" I asked quietly. The question hung in the air between us, sharp as glass. Keith looked away first. "Of course we were," Keith said quickly. "You're my mother." I let the silence stretch between us, watching him shift uncomfortably. In the past, I would have rushed to fill that silence, to make things easier for him. Not this time. Finally, he spoke again. "Have you thought about what we discussed before your surgery? About possibly downsizing? This house is a lot for you to manage." There it was, barely 15 minutes into his visit, and he was already circling back to their plan. "Actually," I began, but the sound of the front door slamming open cut me off. Amara stormed into the living room, her face flushed with anger. "What did you do?" she demanded, glaring at me. Keith jumped to his feet. "Amara, what's wrong?" "Ask your mother," she snapped, tossing her purse onto the sofa. "Go on, Velma. Tell him what the bank just told me." I set my book aside and met her furious eyes calmly. "I assume they informed you that this house is no longer in my name?" I said evenly. Keith blinked. "What? What do you mean?" "It means," I explained. That 6 months ago, I transferred ownership of this house into an irrevocable trust. The papers you had me sign in the hospital are worthless. Amara's voice rose, trembling with rage. You tricked us. No, Amara, I said quietly. You tried to trick me. I simply protected myself. Keith's face had gone pale. Mom, what are you talking about? Those papers were for our vacation. I looked at him, my son, and felt sadness more than anger. Keith, please, don't insult my intelligence. Those papers would have transferred this home into your names. I just had surgery, not memory loss. This is ridiculous, Amara hissed. You can't just— I can, I said sharply. And I already did. I leaned forward slightly, my voice calm but firm. The joint accounts you had access to are closed. Everything has been moved to new accounts that only I can reach. Amara's expression twisted. Did you know about this, Keith? Did you? Of course not, he snapped, running a hand through his hair. Mom, you need to undo this. We're family. This isn't right. Family, I repeated softly, the word catching in my throat. Is that what we are? Because from where I'm sitting, it looks more like you and Amara have been waiting for the right moment to take everything I worked for. That's not true, Keith said weakly. I heard you, I said quietly. Last year, through the open window, you were discussing how to get power of attorney, how to force me to sell my home. Keith's shoulders slumped, guilt written plainly across his face. He didn't even try to deny it. You had no right! Amara's voice cracked, her composure gone. We've been planning this for years. Amara! Keith warned, but it was too late. Planning what exactly? I asked, though I already knew. Her mask fell completely. The sweet smile, the polite tone, all gone. This house is wasted on you, she shouted. Do you even know what it's worth? You live here alone while we're drowning in bills, and you just— Bills? I interrupted. Is that what you call luxury vacations 3 times a year, or the new car you didn't need, or remodeling a kitchen because last year's wasn't stylish enough? Keith dropped his head into his hands. Mom, please, we can work this out. There's nothing to work out, I said calmly. The trust is legally sealed. This house is mine for the rest of my life, and there's nothing either of you can do to change that. Amara's hands trembled as she grabbed her purse. This isn't over, she snapped. We'll get lawyers involved. By all means, I replied evenly. Harriet Wilson, you remember her from my high school reunion, Keith? She made sure everything was done by the book. But if you want to waste money on lawyers, go ahead. You'll regret this, Amara hissed, storming toward the door. Keith, we're leaving. Keith hesitated, torn between her fury and his guilt. Keith, she barked again. He stood slowly, his face pale. We just wanted to help you, Mom. You're twisting everything. I shook my head, feeling the weight of 70 years settle over me. Even now, you can't admit the truth, I said quietly. I think you should go. This isn't over, Amara called from the doorway before slamming the door behind her. Keith lingered for a moment longer, his eyes filled with shame and something else. Fear, maybe. Just go, Keith, I whispered, suddenly exhausted. He nodded once, wordless, and left. The house fell silent again. I should have felt triumphant, but all I felt was a deep, quiet sorrow. I had protected my home, but I had lost my son. Or maybe, if I was honest, I had lost him long before this day. The days that followed were quiet. Too quiet. No angry calls, no threats, no apologies, just silence. A heavy stillness that filled every corner of the house. Dorothy came by each morning with soup and a kind smile. She never asked for details. She didn't need to. And as I sat by the window one afternoon, watching the autumn leaves drift down into the garden Robert and I once tended together, I realized something important. Peace doesn't always come wrapped in joy. Sometimes it arrives quietly after the storm, when you finally stop fighting to be loved by the wrong people. Any news? Dorothy would ask, trying to sound casual as she dropped by with soup or flowers. Not a word, I'd reply, matching her tone. We both pretended the silence meant peace, but deep down, we knew better. It wasn't peace. It was the calm before the next storm. That storm arrived the following Thursday afternoon, almost a week after the confrontation. I was in the garden, carefully pruning my roses. The sun was warm, the air smelled of damp earth, and for the first time in days, I felt almost content. Then I heard it, the crunch of tires on gravel. A sleek black sedan pulled into my driveway. A woman in a tailored business suit stepped out, carrying a leather portfolio. "Mrs. Velma Harrington?" she called as she approached. I straightened up slowly, mindful of the tightness in my chest. "Yes?" "I'm Jessica Moore from Lawson & Associates," she said, handing me a business card. "I represent your son and his wife in a legal matter concerning your property." Of course, just as Amara had promised. "I'm recovering from heart surgery," I said evenly. "If you have documents, you can leave them with me. My attorney will review everything." Jessica blinked, surprised by my composure. Perhaps she'd expected a frail woman trembling at the sight of legal stationery. "Mrs. Harrington," she said cautiously, "this is a serious matter. Your son believes you may have made these recent decisions under duress or with diminished capacity. He's prepared to petition for a competency hearing if necessary." For a moment I couldn't even speak. Then the anger came, quiet but fierce. "Diminished capacity?" I said calmly. "Ms. Moore, my mind is as clear as ever. My attorney has full medical documentation proving my competence, including evaluations from my doctors. Now, if you're here to deliver papers, please leave them. Otherwise, I have roses to tend to." She hesitated, thrown off balance. Then, finally, she handed me a thick envelope. "Your son cares about you, Mrs. Harrington," she said softly. "He's just concerned for your well-being." I accepted the papers, my hands still dusted with soil. "Is that so?" I murmured. "Then he has a strange way of showing it." As soon as she left, I called Harriet. "They're claiming I wasn't in my right mind," I told her. Harriet sighed, annoyed, not alarmed. "Predictable," she said, "but easy to counter. We have your medical reports and Dr. Matthews' written evaluation confirming your mental competence before we even created the trust. Don't worry, Velma, this move will backfire." And she was right. 2 weeks later, I sat in Harriet's office as she set the papers aside with a faint smile. "They've withdrawn the petition," she said. "Their lawyer reviewed the evidence and realized it wouldn't hold up." Relief should have washed over me, but instead I just felt empty. "What now?" I asked quietly. Harriet leaned forward, her tone softening. "They'll try another tactic. People like Keith and Amara rarely give up when money's involved." She was right again. The next attack wasn't through lawyers, it came through family. My phone began to ring constantly. Cousins I hadn't heard from in years, Robert's distant relatives, even his sister Mildred. "How could you do this to your own son?" Mildred scolded the moment I answered. "Keith told me everything. How you turned against him, how you're punishing him for trying to help." "Did he also tell you," I asked gently, "that he and Amara tried to trick me into signing away my house while I was recovering from surgery?" "He said you misunderstood," Mildred replied coldly. "He was only trying to protect your assets." "From whom?" I asked quietly. Certainly not from himself. The conversation spiraled from there, ending with her saying words that stung far more than I wanted to admit. "Robert would be ashamed of you." I sat there long after the call ended, the silence ringing louder than her voice. Keith had been busy spinning his version of the story to anyone who'd listen. In his version, he was the concerned son. I was the unstable, ungrateful mother. Dorothy found me sitting on the porch one evening, staring at the fading sky after another painful call from Robert's brother. "They're trying to isolate you," she said, settling into the chair beside me. "Make you feel guilty so you'll give in." I nodded, too tired to speak. "Don't let them," she said firmly. "You know the truth. I know the truth. And somewhere deep down, Keith does too." A week later, I ran into Mary Peterson at the grocery store. Her daughter had gone to school with Keith. "Velma," she said warmly, giving me a gentle hug. "You look wonderful. How are you feeling after the surgery?" "Much better, thank you," I replied, grateful for her kindness. "I saw Keith last weekend," she continued. "He seemed different, stressed." My chest tightened, waiting for the usual accusations, but instead, Mary lowered her voice. "Between us," she whispered, "he's been asking about refinancing options. Apparently they're in real financial trouble." I froze. "Trouble?" Mary nodded sympathetically. "Word is, Amara quit her job months ago. They've been living on credit cards just to keep up that big house." I managed a small nod as she walked away, her cart rattling softly down the aisle. For a long moment, I stood there in the canned goods section, hands resting on the cart handle, heart heavy but calm. Life has a strange way of teaching lessons. Sometimes the storm you feared turns out to be the one that finally clears the sky. Maybe it was more appearance than reality. The thought sat heavy in my chest. Keith and Amara's financial problems ran far deeper than I'd imagined. No wonder they'd been so desperate to get their hands on my house. When I returned home from errands that afternoon, the answering machine light blinked softly. It was a voicemail from Keith. The first time I'd heard his voice since the confrontation. "Mom," he began, his voice strained, tired. "We need to talk. Not about the house or money, just please call me back." I stood there in the quiet kitchen, finger hovering over the callback button. For a moment, the mother in me wanted to believe him, but then I remembered the cold look in his eyes as he'd watched Amara slide those papers toward me in the hospital. I set the phone down. I didn't call back. 2 days later, a letter arrived. Not legal documents this time. Just a single handwritten note on plain paper. "Mom, I know you probably hate me right now. Maybe I deserve it. Things with Amara have gotten complicated. I need your advice. Not your money, just a conversation. Please." I folded the letter carefully and placed it in my desk drawer. Part of me ached to reach out, to comfort him, to fix things the way I always had. But the wiser part, the one that had finally learned to protect itself, knew this might be another test, another manipulation. That evening, as I watered my garden, I noticed a car parked quietly down the street. Keith's car. He didn't approach. He just sat there, engine idling, watching the house. After nearly an hour, he drove away. The next morning, Dorothy called. "Did you hear?" she asked, her voice buzzing with concern. "Keith moved out. Amara's been telling everyone it's temporary, but Helen's daughter works at the bank. They've missed 3 mortgage payments." I froze. 3? 3, Dorothy confirmed. "And rumor is, Amara's been staying with her parents in Connecticut." The news should have satisfied me. It was, after all, the natural consequence of their choices. But instead, I felt an ache deeper than pride could hide. An ache for the little boy who once ran barefoot through our yard with dandelions in his hand, who'd grown into a man lost somewhere along the way. Autumn arrived, dressed in gold and scarlet. The air turned crisp. The roses began to fade. 3 months had passed since that awful day. 3 months of recovery of body and heart. I was trimming the rose bushes for winter when I saw Dorothy hurrying across the lawn, waving a folded newspaper. "Have you seen this?" she asked, slightly out of breath. I wiped my hands on my gardening apron and took the paper from her. The real estate section was open front and center was a familiar photograph. Keith and Amara's house. For sale. Foreclosure. Dorothy lowered her voice. "Helen says they couldn't make a deal with the bank. Amara's moved back with her parents." I stared at the picture for a long time. The manicured lawn, the towering facade, all of it built to impress, never to welcome. How much of their life, I murmured, was sacrificed to keep up that illusion? "And Keith?" I asked quietly. Dorothy hesitated. "No one knows for sure. Rumor is he's staying at that old Holiday Inn off Route 9. I folded the paper and handed it back to her with a small nod. "Thank you for telling me." That night I sat on my porch watching the sky fade to amber and violet. The air smelled like rain and fallen leaves. I thought of Keith, not the man who'd tried to take my home, but the boy who'd once cried in my arms the night his father died. Despite everything, he was still my son. But love without boundaries, I'd learned, isn't love at all. It's surrender, and I had surrendered for far too long. The next morning, I made a quiet decision. I wouldn't chase him, but I wouldn't shut the door either. If he came to me on his own, truly came, I would listen. 2 weeks later, the foreclosure sign went up on their lawn. Neighbors whispered. My phone stayed silent. Until one Saturday afternoon, I was baking bread, a small joy I'd rediscovered during recovery, when I heard a knock at the door. Not the entitled jingle of a key in the lock. A knock, hesitant, unsure. I wiped my flour-covered hands on my apron and opened the door. Keith stood there. He looked nothing like the polished man Amara had molded. His suit was wrinkled, his shoulders slumped, dark circles under his eyes. He looked like Robert in our hardest years, tired, worn down, human. "Mom," he said quietly. I didn't rush to him, didn't fill the silence with words. I simply looked at him, really looked at him, for the first time in a long while. "May I come in?" he asked finally, voice breaking just a little. I stepped aside. He walked in slowly, the house echoing with memories he'd almost lost. He sat down on the edge of the sofa, the same spot where he'd once tried to justify taking everything from me. "Would you like some tea?" I asked gently, holding on to a calm I didn't quite feel. He nodded. "Please." As I moved toward the kitchen, I felt something shift inside me. Not forgiveness, not yet, but the faint stirrings of possibility. Maybe some wounds don't heal perfectly, but they heal enough for you to start again. "Please," Keith said, nodding, relief softening his tired features. In the kitchen, I focused on the simple rhythm of making tea, warming the pot, measuring the leaves, arranging cookies on a plate. The familiar motions steadied me. When I returned, Keith was standing near the mantel, eyes fixed on a framed photo, his high school graduation day. "I was happy then," he murmured. "We both were." "Yes," I said quietly, pouring the tea. "We were." A long silence filled the room, heavy but not hostile, just full of years that couldn't be rewound. Finally, Keith exhaled and looked straight at me. "I'm sorry, Mom," he said, "not just for the papers or what happened after your surgery, for all of it, for who I became." I studied him carefully, waiting for the familiar signs of manipulation or guilt trading, but I saw only exhaustion, and something that looked like truth. "Amara left," he continued after a moment. "When the foreclosure became final, she said she didn't sign up for this, packed her things and went back to her parents." "I heard," I said quietly. He gave a hollow laugh. "Of course you did. Small town." He ran a hand through his disheveled hair. "I've been at the Holiday Inn for a few weeks. Lost my job last Friday. Turns out showing up late and looking like this," he gestured at his wrinkled shirt, "isn't great for business." "I'm sorry to hear that," I said, and meant it. Despite everything, I took no joy in my son's fall. "Don't be," he said, surprising me. "I needed this, all of it." His gaze moved slowly around the room, lingering on the worn sofa, the faded curtains, the home Amara had always mocked. "I lost myself, Mom, somewhere between wanting more and never being satisfied with what I had." I said nothing, letting the sound of the clock fill the pause. "The thing is," he went on softly, "I don't know how to find my way back." For the first time in years, I saw my Keith again, not the polished man chasing approval, not the schemer, but the boy with honest eyes who used to bring me wildflowers. "The way back," I said gently, "starts with honesty, with yourself first, and then with the people you hurt." He nodded slowly. "I've had a lot of time to think about who I've been, how I treated you. The worst part is, I knew it was wrong, every single step. But I kept going." "Why?" I asked, the question that had haunted me for years. Because it was easier than standing up to Amara, easier than admitting we built a life we couldn't afford, easier than facing who I'd become. He set his teacup down with trembling hands. I'm not asking for money, Mom, or a place to live. I just needed you to know I understand now, and that I'm sorry. I sat back, feeling a quiet shift inside me. Not pity, not guilt. Something steadier. The guest room is available, I said finally. You can stay for 2 months, no rent, but you'll help around the house, look for work, and after 2 months we'll discuss rent if you're employed. Keith stared at me, stunned. Mom, you don't have to. I know, I interrupted softly. I'm choosing to. But this time, there are boundaries, Keith, real ones. If you lie or try to manipulate me again, you'll leave. The same day, no exceptions. He nodded, understanding at last. Thank you. Don't thank me yet, I said with a faint smile. Wait until you see the list of repairs I've been saving for the past year. For the first time, his smile reached his eyes, not the practiced grin from his old life, but something real, something human. 6 months later, today, on my 71st birthday, my house is filled with real warmth for the first time in years. Keith has rebuilt his life piece by piece. He's working at a small accounting firm in town and has his own apartment now. He still joins me for dinner twice a week, quieter, humbler, still learning who he is without Amara's shadow. Dorothy and her husband are here tonight, along with a few old friends I've reconnected with. Even Harriet came, carrying a bottle of wine and more legal jokes than anyone asked for. There's no sign of Amara. Last I heard, she remarried, a man with a big house and a healthy bank account. I wish him better luck than my son had. Keith appears from the kitchen, balancing a cake that's slightly uneven but baked with genuine effort. Make a wish, Mom, he says as he lights the candles. I close my eyes, but I don't wish for anything. Everything I need is already here. A home that is truly mine. A son rediscovering his integrity, and the quiet strength I found the day I finally stood my ground. Some lessons arrive late in life, but they're no less precious for it. Now I'm curious about you. What would you have done in my place? Have you ever had to choose between forgiveness and self-protection? Share your thoughts in the comments. I read everyone. And before you go, don't forget to like and subscribe. On the next screen, I'm leaving 2 other true-to-life stories that my viewers love. And trust me, both have endings you won't see coming. Thank you for staying with me until the end.